Good afternoon, and welcome to this panel event hosted by the Miami Herald. I'm Jane Wooldridge. I'm the business editor at the Miami Herald, and we're delighted to have you with us today to make this important conversation about the importance of childcare in our community and in all communities, but we care mostly about ours. At the Miami Herald, our mission is to serve our community, and we do that through reporting, which is sometimes utility information, like where you should get your vaccine shot, and sometimes with deep enterprise reporting, such as this recent Childcare series. We reach our community through various platforms, including narratives online and in print, events such as this panel discussion, videos such as our current series, Inside the COVID Ward. And if you haven't seen that, you really probably want to take a look. And newsletters. And those are just some of the ways that we try to serve you. Today's event follows our recent childcare series, as you all know, that was reported by Yadira Lopez with the support of grants from the Solutions Journalism Network and Report for America. You can help support this work by contributing to an oncoming campaign that will be announced coming soon to the Miami Herald website. Every bit that you contribute helps us do this kind of work, and we appreciate it. This is how we think today will go. Yadira will introduce our panelists and then speak for a little bit about what it took to actually put this series together. It's harder than it looks. And so we think that you may be interested to know how it came about. Then we will do some conversation with all of our panelists, and we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions you'd like to ask or like us to ask our panelists, please put those into the comments and we will make sure that we try to get to all of them. So again, thank you very much for being with us today. And Yadira, this is your cue.
Hi, my name is Yadira Lopez. I'm the economic mobility reporter at the Herald. And I spent about 3 months working on this childcare series, total of around 5 stories about childcare and potential solutions for the issue of, how to care for your kids, basically. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and I want to thank them all for joining me. I spoke to all of them for these stories, and they were extremely helpful, and they really helped guide the stories that I ended up writing. First up is Dr. Maria Ilcheva. She's the assistant director of the FIU Metropolitan Center. We have also Lattice Montes, who's the group vice president of the United Way Center for Excellence in Early Education. We have Shadia Nelson, who's the programs manager and artistic director at the children's nonprofit Urgent Inc. here in Miami. We also have Emma Harris. She's the CEO and co-founder of Kiddo, which is a talent marketplace for early childhood education. And she's also a new mom. And last we have Mario Cardona, who's the chief of policy and practice for Childcare Aware of America. And just briefly, this was a lot harder than I thought to write. We wanted to talk about childcare because we recognized that it was a pretty pressing and important issue here in Miami, but also nationwide. A lot of publications talked about it, especially after the pandemic. There was a lot of emphasis on what the pandemic did to childcare, but we sort of forgot that these issues were there before the pandemic, I think. Here we wanted to focus, a lot of publications wrote about people who were able to work from home, but we also sort of wanted to look at those families that couldn't work from home because they had jobs where they had to be physically present. And then as I reported, one of the things that we found out really was that one of the biggest issues here is that we have a lot of families who make just too much money to qualify for childcare vouchers, but not enough to where they can comfortably pay for care. So they either don't qualify for vouchers or they, for whatever reason, don't apply for them. So they're stuck with these giant bills or no way to pay for childcare. So they end up having to make all these difficult choices. One of the most interesting things that happened during the reporting for me was I noticed, well, first of all, it was very difficult to find families to go on the record who wanted to talk about this openly. I tried to talk to a lot of agencies. We did a call out and that was pretty successful. I ended up having to go to different businesses and basically just ask people like servers or cashiers, hey, is this something that you struggle with? And would you talk to me for the story? It was, hit or miss. But yeah, that was the biggest challenge, was finding people to talk to. And then one of the things that I found most interesting was that a lot of people that I spoke to would talk about the issues that they had at work and how their jobs basically didn't recognize this as an issue. It was sort of like an open secret. but they're really adamant that I never talk about their jobs or I never mention these issues. They sort of didn't want to call out their place of employment. And that was pretty common to hear from people. And I saw this in action at one point when I reported in with the moms that I spoke to. I went to her job, and there was some miscommunication there, and her employer sort of kicked us out. She didn't want us reporting on the premises or talking to her employee. And when I explained the story to her, she sort of said something interesting. She was like, "Well, this has nothing to do with me, this childcare issue." And I just thought that was so important, because it was sort of I noticed that for employers, it was sort of an out of sight, out of mind issue when it came to their employees. This is childcare problems and the struggles that they deal with. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I think we can jump right into what's next.
Okay, so Yadira, thank you. And just to tell you a little bit more, Yadira went all over the place, nights, weekends, midnights, to try and find workers who were willing to talk about this. So what you see is 5 stories and you think, oh, this took a few weeks, but in fact, it took several months. So I just wanted to add that perspective. And now we're going to go to our panelists. And I think it would be really useful for us to talk about what childcare looked like pre-pandemic. So I want to start with Mario Cardona, because Mario, you've got more of a national perspective. And if you can give us just a thumbnail of what it looks like on the national level. And then Gladys Montes, we're going to ask you to talk a little bit more about what things were like here locally. So Mario?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this really important discussion, and for Yadira for all of her reporting. And I really want to underscore one of the things that Yadira mentioned at the end, in terms of folks not really thinking that this was an issue that affected them if it wasn't if they weren't a parent with a child who required care. When I started working on this issue over 10 years ago, it was a pretty obscure policy space, and it's been overlooked for a long time. And I think it's really important to underscore that it's been a silent support enabling company productivity, individual economic mobility, school readiness, and children's social and emotional development. Childcare has always been that, but in 2020, when life as we know it was upended by the pandemic, it finally called the nation's attention. And there have been issues that exist in the system of early care and education that preceded the pandemic, and that's important to note. Before the pandemic, the U.S. childcare system was in trouble. It's a fragmented system, and because of that, at times it doesn't even feel like a system. And that fragmentation is somewhat by design, because each state has its own set of childcare policies and funding, and childcare comes from different sources with different requirements. And so that makes it really complex from a policy and administration standpoint, but it also makes it really complicated for parents and for providers to navigate. And the system as we knew it before the pandemic was inequitable and inaccessible, particularly for children and families who came from communities of color and families from low-income backgrounds. And it was underfunded. The U.S. spends less than 0.5% of our gross domestic product on childcare, far less than most industrialized countries. And because of that, childcare has to place a high burden on families paying the price of care and on educators working for low wages, an average of about $11.65 an hour, often without health insurance or paid family and medical leave and paid sick days. And all of that creates pretty clear inequities. And so for many families, prior to the pandemic, quality care wasn't an option. There wasn't enough child care providers to meet the demand, and providers were leaving the field in record numbers. And this was also an issue in South Florida. Data from the Center for American Progress showed that pockets of Miami-Dade County had large amounts of scarcity in terms of the supply of care. And in the state of Florida, we know that even prior to the pandemic, the supply of center-based and home-based care was decreasing year over year. So there were fewer spots for children to go to. And in addition to that, the price of care was unaffordably high. The average price of care for an infant in a center in 2020 was $9,600, which could represent, more than a third of the discretionary income from a single parent who is living at the state's median income. So when you layer COVID-19 on top of that, it really threw the system into deeper crisis. And many providers remain closed or are in danger of closing. Parents are struggling to find care arrangements that will allow them to work productively. And without a reliable, steady workforce, our country will not recover economically from the pandemic. And so we're dealing with a lot of issues and playing a lot of catch up now in the context of our relief efforts.
Mario, thank you. And I think that's one of the things that really was underscored for me by Yadira's reporting is how big of a hurdle to economic mobility that childcare is. And if you just think about your own experiences, I was a kid in childcare when I was a little kid, and I think then it was more readily available. And so if you don't have friends and family to take care of that child, how can you work the extra hours? How can you get the education? Gladys, would you do us the favor of telling us more about the local situation prior to the pandemic?
I think that Mario covered a lot of the issues and a lot of the problems that we have in our local community that have to do with childcare. We start with, I don't think that we have lack of childcare before the pandemic. We have plenty of centers, but having plenty of centers, that meant that not all of them were of high quality. So there is an issue for families to access high quality childcare in our community. And high quality usually is attached to a high tag. People need to pay for it. And like Myra was saying, low-income families have a real hard time accessing high-quality childcare. We do have a lot of assistance from our Early Learning Coalition, who's servicing a number of families and giving subsidy to them. But, we still have a lot of children that are not being able to receive services. Our caregivers are being paid very low in our industry, and that puts them in a very difficult position because we're asking them to do a lot for very little dollars in their pockets. We do have family childcare homes, even though they're decreasing. That is an option, and then we have our centers that are operating in our community. But one of the things that is happening is that people are depending a lot on the friends, family, and neighborhood system, which at times it is not a dependable system. When one of them gets sick, then the child needs to go somewhere else, or the parent is not going to show up to work. And most of our parents that are working on hourly wages, then they are going to lose jobs because of that. So that's an issue that it's affecting us very much. We have on top of all of these, the cost of living in Miami-Dade County continues to increase, and even if you're working, you need to have 1, 2, or 3 jobs in order to make sure that your family is tended in the best of the ways, and that's put a family in a lot of need for childcare that it's not there. There's not. We don't have a childcare system that has flexibility of hours for families or that are going to help them do this thing. So I think it's what Mario was saying, and it is compounded by the situation that we have in our community.
Yadira, I think you're up next.
Yeah, so Dr. Silva, if you want to take this one, what kind of families face the greatest childcare challenges locally? Is there a specific type of family, that is struggling the most?
Thank you, Adira, and I want to thank the Miami Herald for organizing this panel and this series of excellent reporting, illuminating one of the very important issues for our community, which, as you all noted, is not an issue that emerged because of the pandemic, but has been a long-standing concern in terms of national policies for childcare and in terms of economic opportunity and mobility, as Mario mentioned. I want to mention an affordability benchmark that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has as a way to frame my answer as to who is suffering more, which families, what types of groups are suffering more as a result of lack of affordability for many of childcare. According to that affordability benchmark, childcare is considered affordable if a family, if it costs, childcare costs families no more than 7% of their income, right? 7% on childcare overall. Across nearly every category, marital status, race, ethnicity, income, all of the types of demographic categories for our population, families are paying above that affordability benchmark. On average, they pay about 10% of their income for childcare. Lower income families, though, pay a high percentage of their income. And even though, as we know, as Adira noted, we have these support programs for families in poverty. Many of them have income that is just above that threshold of poverty, so they don't qualify for free childcare. Only 4 in 10 low-income working families pay for childcare, but among those who actually do, childcare costs can consume up to 35%, a third of their income on childcare, which is, again, 5 times more than that affordability benchmark. Middle-class families also pay more than that benchmark. On average, double that 7% of their income is spent. So it covers all different kinds of families, the lack of affordable childcare across the nation. And as you know, bringing it down to our level, our family incomes are much lower than the national, which implies that we have a larger percentage of families for whom childcare is unaffordable, and they, as some of my fellow panelists noted, they have to rely on families or other non-traditional childcare providers, maybe not as high quality childcare providers, as a way to reduce these costs.
Yeah, those are pretty staggering numbers. Like when you look at the data, that really blew me away. I want to go now to Shadia and also Gladys, if you'd like to chime in. What do you hear from parents, on the ground regarding childcare? What do they do for childcare, or what do they do to make sure that they can access care? And how has that changed? What are they doing now compared to what they did before the pandemic?
Well, what we hear from parents every single day is the lack of accessibility. I can't find childcare. We've had the opportunity of having to work with families that has to stop working because they just cannot find the care, especially if you're talking about a child in between the ages of 0 and 36 months. It's very limited. And then when that happens, you have to make a decision. Do I continue to work or do I stop working and then care for my child? So we have seen that in more than one occasion, which is more than sad, because our people that were very productive before the pandemic and now they are having the issues. Even though I do think that infant and toddler has been is what we call the black hole. We have help for mothers before they're going to have their babies, then they have their babies, and sort of like, so what do we do with these babies until the baby is in the preschool stage? And then we're going to have, a lot more services provided to them. But that 0 to 36 continues to be, like a really big problem for them. And what do is either they stop working or they go back and they have to rely on their neighbor, or they have to rely on some member of their family who's not working at this moment, or we have seen families that are having working different shifts, if the father is working in the morning, the mom is working at night. So the child then is lacking for that sense of family that we all go for. So I think that this is affecting families in many different ways, and the solution for them are very limited, and we can see them as they come through our doors and their hands are up. I just don't know what to do. Please help me.
Emma, I wonder if you could chime in with that question too. What do you hear your friends or even neighbors say? Like, what are they doing to access care?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Harris. I am happy to be here today and share my perspective. I will say that personally, so I'm a new mom. I had my first baby in November, and I spent a lot of time when I was pregnant trying to figure out what my childcare situation was going to be. I had always kind of assumed that because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm in early stages of a new business and paying myself a modest salary, that the best option for me would be daycare. But with the pandemic, it wasn't an option that I felt comfortable with. And I also realized very quickly that when I went back to work, when my son was only 9 weeks old, there was no infant care option for him that would even accept him, despite the whole my concern with the pandemic. And so amongst myself and a lot of my friends, I've seen various scenarios play out where a lot of my friends have decided not to go back to work after having babies, just because it didn't make sense that their salaries were not high enough for them to be able to cover care. And so they were, unless they were going to work for their own personal fulfillment reasons, or because they loved what they were doing, or they had future opportunity, or there was someone else in the household that was able to support with a different income, then some people that I know have decided not to go back to work because it just wouldn't make sense financially for them. They would basically be going to work just to pay for a nanny. I do have friends during the pandemic who had young kids at home, who them and maybe their partner were also both working from home and trying to hack it together and figure out how to work full time with young kids at home amongst a pandemic. And that was also a really complicated situation. And so I've just seen, a range of different solutions, none of which have been perfect. I think right now I'm seeing friends who had their kids in daycare or preschool pre-pandemic starting to feel comfortable sending them back in recent months, which I think has been a really big relief for people who have been working at home with young kids for the last year plus. And so hopefully things are slowly starting to get back to normal. But I don't see the scenario of some of my friends who have decided not to go back to work because of childcare prices. I don't think that's changing because of COVID. That wasn't a COVID specific issue. That was something that we were seeing before COVID.
Great, thanks for that. This brings us actually to a larger question. Of course, we know that there's a massive impact on individual families, but there's also a societal impact here. It affects the economy, it affects future opportunities, and Shadia, when you see people who are grappling with this, are they thinking at all about those future opportunities, and about how whether or not they stay in the workforce affects that?
Thank you. I'm Shadia Nelson with Urgent Inc., the Artistic Director and Programs Manager. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your whole question. Could you state your question one more time?
Yeah. The people who you're interacting with, are many of them leaving the workforce? Let's start there.
Are many of the families that we encounter. So Urgent Inc., we're a youth and community development organization. We provide summer camp, after school, and summer youth employment for high school students. Are you asking if any of those families have directly been impacted? And as far as workforce, is that?
What kind of impacts have you seen on the clients that you work with around the child care crisis and the pandemic in particular, but affordability overall?
Okay. For the K-12 portfolio that we work with, the families who have definitely been impacted, being able to access different types of childcare, especially for the multi age for the household that they have. So if you have a young person in elementary and then you have a high school student, they're impacted different ways, whether the students can continue going to school virtually, which is definitely makes a direct impact of their being able to go to any additional activity afterward. So if you have for the K-5 elementary and there's no additional space for that young person to go to, that definitely makes an impact. We find that some of the families who have enrolled their students in our program have lost employment and have been having a hard time managing finding childcare. I think the great thing that what Urgent Inc. does is that we meet families where they are. So we're able to continue providing childcare. We were able to pivot during this time in the global pandemic where parents can find a safe, affordable, fun, engaging opportunity for their young people to participate. So what we've also done is looking at expanding the scope of the young people that we work with. So some of the programs that we offer are gender specific. So then we added a co-ed opportunity for more young people to benefit from the work that we do for our after school and for our summer camp to help offset those families for the affordable.
How many families are you able to help? Is that, I assume that's limited by funding?
Well, it's twofold, right? So part of it is funding. We're very happy that we're able to have funding provided through the Children's Trust, Miami-Dade County, the Miami Foundation, and we've been able to have some economic support from the stimulus for organizations and how we've been able to sustain operating our business for the young people for all the youth development programs.
So the people who you deal with who have lost jobs, are they voluntarily leaving those jobs because of childcare reasons, or are they just losing the jobs because of the economy?
It's primarily COVID impact. Unfortunately, many businesses and organizations had to close down. For example, one of the grandparents, where we used to offer a program for intergenerational projects for grandparents using grandchildren, she had dedicated many years in childcare. And once COVID shut down everything last year and it has not reopened, that was her income source. It's not coming in anymore. So what do you do for those childcare centers who aren't able to pivot and continue providing that resource? And then what happens to the families who aren't able to pivot and find another work? Unfortunately, it's hard to find work now, especially for her age bracket. So many seniors are also finding that also being a challenge, finding discrimination in different places where they're just not able to find work. So they've tried and it's been unsuccessful. It's kind of it's challenging, one because of their age, and then one because it's COVID. So do you jeopardize your health and safety in a new workforce, or do you struggle and try to find additional income resource to support your family?
So
it's a real hard time.
So we can see that this is a whole economic system that plays in from a lot of different directions. Mario, would you talk a little bit, because I think you have probably been tracking this, and I know also that Dr. Ilcheva has also tracked this, what the overall societal cost is when people can't get child care that they can afford. There's a long-term impact here, isn't there?
Oh, certainly. And the impact was felt, again, prior to the pandemic. I mean, so what we're seeing now is the results of decades of underinvestment in early care and education. And if you were to look at the immediate economic impact of the crisis that's been experienced in childcare over the last year or so, people have left the workforce. I mean, so working parents have had to make the decision that's been described by a lot of different panelists, which is that they have to look at whether or not they can afford to work and also take care of their child at the same time, or whether they can afford the price of care if they're having some sort of instability in the context of their employment. And so people are leaving the workforce. Hundreds of thousands of people are leaving the workforce. And data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that was released in December showed that for those adult parents who are not working, about 1 in 5 were saying that childcare related issues were keeping them from going back to work. And so that has a direct impact on the economy, and will have long-lasting impacts on the economy if it's not addressed. So one of the things that's really important recently is the relief that's been passed by Congress and signed into law by President Biden in the form of the American Rescue Plan. And so that's $24 billion of investment to help stabilize the childcare sector and help them keep their doors open and help them reopen if they've had to shutter their doors, and help them meet critical expenses that they've incurred during the pandemic, including taking on personal protective equipment, instituting health mitigation measures, and really providing an essential service to the families in their communities. And it should be noted that childcare providers have been doing this at a significant cost to themselves during the pandemic. Many of them have taken on personal debt. Many of them have had to engage in staff layoffs or wage reductions for an already underpaid workforce in order to maintain operations during the course of the pandemic so that parents can go to work. And so this relief that Congress passed and that states are set to receive fairly soon is going to be really important. And in addition to that $24 billion of investment, states are going to have $15 billion or so to help families who are struggling better afford childcare. And so that could have a huge impact for families, providers, and for local communities. The state of Florida is set to receive over $2 billion for the American Rescue Plan. And those funds haven't yet been allocated, but once they are, it's going to be really important that the state starts thinking about how to wisely and effectively use those investments, not only to meet the immediate needs that have resulted from the pandemic, but also in the long term, so that we can make sure that we're making the kinds of investments that will provide for a more sustainable childcare sector.
Thank you, Mario. So, Dr. Ilcheva, I know that you have the statistical and academic look at this. I've seen some statistics that say there's as much as $65 billion in work productivity being lost in the overall economy because of women giving up work to stay home with their children for childcare reasons during the pandemic. What other impacts are you seeing to the local economy here?
I want to add to what you said, Jane, and what Mario also alluded from the perspective of overall impact on families. Yes, childcare concerns are a barrier to work overall, but especially for mothers who disproportionately, as we know, take on caregiving responsibilities, unpaid caregiving responsibilities when their family cannot afford childcare or there is no accessible childcare. Mario also mentioned the presence of deserts. There are childcare deserts in Miami-Dade County, even though as our providers have a number of providers, resources, professional development opportunities, support systems for those, but still those are apparently not equally distributed around the community. So some families may have a problem with access. But with regards to women, what we see in terms of the disproportionate impact on women, again, it's not a new development. It's just a heightened awareness of how now it's affecting women even more. Women's labor force participation has always been lower than men's, even though it was going up. But I anticipate as the new numbers, the 2020 numbers come out, we will see a significant drop in women's labor force participation. Women are also more likely to work part-time and make long-term career sacrifices, either working fewer hours or choosing careers that will allow them the flexibility they need to take care of their children and families. And these decisions are ultimately affecting pay equity. In 2019, before the pandemic, in Miami-Dade, the income of women working full-time was almost 20% lower than men's. That's connected again to the career choices women make, lower number of working hours, and overall the decisions to balance their work and family lives. There is a growing awareness now as a result of the pandemic, so I'm seeing that as a positive, that illumination of the importance of childcare, about the links between childcare, parental employment, and overall economic growth. Businesses rely on employees rely on childcare. Mario mentioned the efforts at the national level to address some of these challenges. And one of the proposed measures actually was support directly to employers to provide childcare. So that's quite innovative for our country. It's been implemented elsewhere around the world and in Europe, but that's quite innovative in our country. I want to mention also something very interesting related to long-term economic impacts, which are related to our demographics. We don't talk enough about this issue, but we should. Birth counts have been decreasing year over year since 2016, again, before the pandemic, both in Florida and in Miami-Dade. And that's related to the challenges families face and the decisions they have to make in economic opportunity. In 2020, in Miami-Dade, there were fewer than 28,000 babies born. This is almost a 20% decrease since 2007, before the Great Recession started. despite the significant population increase we have experienced since then. And childcare is an important reason. Our families and women in particular are not getting the support they need to be able to raise children while still leading prosperous and economically productive lives. And the demographic crisis that we will likely experience. By the way, there is a term that I like that I saw recently from the Brookings Institution. You know how we talk about baby boom 5-6 decades ago and the baby boomers. The Brookings institutions actually proposed the term baby bust, that's likely what we'll be experiencing as a result of the pandemic and the heightened impact of the pandemic. But as I said, that decline in birth rates, in birth counts, has been happening for a number of years. Without that concerted effort to resolve these issues, childcare issues with their long-term but likely impact, we'll also have problems down the road in paying for services, for social services. Some of our programs, as a result of loss of labor force, a result of loss of productivity and government revenues, will likely have to be cut or significantly modified in order to continue to provide at least some relief.
I'm really glad you brought up the gender issue, Dr. Ocheva, because I did notice reporting that childcare labor force is really gendered. It's something like 95% women who work as childcare workers.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little about that. You know, for those who work in childcare, what are some of the challenges that they face? And I know Shadia and Gladys, you both touched on this, so if either of you wants to jump in.
I think that, this is an industry that that has been neglected and forgotten for so many years. And we've talked about this, before. It's about the low wages that our practitioners are getting. And I think that in addition to that, we have to talk about the cost of providing the services and how it is that, like others have said before, parents cannot afford tuitions that are going to cover for the kind of services that the children deserve and children have the right to receive. So the quality that we're providing is low or in some cases, and it's because there is no dollars that can help us hire the right people to be in the centers and then to provide the care that we want. And I think that, we need to talk about when on March 13, when all of the centers had to shut down, and change the way that we were providing care, and we moved to virtual experiences for children at times when virtual was really not what was needed by a child. We all know the importance of social emotional development for children and how important is that relationship that develops in between the caregiver and the child, which all of a sudden was interrupted by the use of computers. That was the only way that we could work and access the families and try to have a connection with them and maintain them sane during the pandemic, the beginnings of it. We haven't talked about mental health, how the lack of childcare has produced many mental health issues for our moms, our families, and our children that at times were put in situations that were really not the safest for them. So we have an industry that needs a lot to move forward and that needs to be looked at and lots of changes need to happen. I am so happy to hear of the many assistances that are going to be coming soon, but until then we still have a service to a family that might not be at the levels that it needs to be, or for a child, and we have a workforce that it's ill, it's suffering. We have like we said before, it's mostly comprised by women, and these women are not being paid at the level that they need to be paid. So that means that for them, they suffer in their own homes. They suffer food insecurity. They are not being able to pay their bills, and all of that in the mind of somebody who's coming in the next day and is taking care of the children of other children who might be going through very similar situations at home. So I think, like the title says, it is an industry that is totally in crisis that we need to help one way or another.
I would love to jump in just second some of what Gladys was saying. Right now, I'm in early stages of building a job site. It's called Kiddo, specifically for early childhood educators. So in simple terms, what that means is we're building a website that will help great preschools and nursery schools and daycares find qualified teachers and vice versa. And so in early stages of us building this business right now, I spend 75% of my day talking to both sides of this marketplace. So schools that have hiring needs right now, and also educators and daycare providers, all types of childcare providers that are looking for new jobs. And I would say that I'm overwhelmingly hearing from probably it's 97, I would say, percent women who are the childcare providers that we're helping place with these jobs. And so many of them, I hear the same sort of complaints over and over again, that they're exhausted in terms of their low salaries, and that a lot of them lost their jobs due to COVID, or were scared to go back into their centers, their places of work. And so therefore they had to leave their jobs because of COVID. And now as the workforce is starting to slowly come back together, and a lot of the centers are seeing an increase in enrollment, which is great because now they have a lot of hiring needs and they're able to bring teachers back in. A lot of those problems in terms of salary, for example, that existed before COVID still, of course, exist. And so without any sort of light being shined on this industry, or government support, or a push for higher wages, and it just becomes really complicated. So I just wanted to second that I'm hearing that firsthand on both sides of the table on a daily basis right now.
Yeah, Gladys, I'm happy you mentioned the importance of social emotional development. We've definitely seen the impact it has on our young people from K to 12. And it looks very different for each group of young people. We find it's very important that looking for a fun opportunity to engage young people, whether it's after school, an internship, or summer camp. Fun is part of mental health and wellness. And so that is an essential part that we do with the work that we offer in our after school and summer camp and our summer youth employment. We find that we had to bring in some great partnerships like Mindful Kids Miami or University of Miami, the Crecer team, who've been able to provide wellness sessions for the young people. It's a lot to take in of everything. So the impact of the household, it could be the impact of, for those students who've been going to school online all day, so they're zoomed out. And then when they come to us, we've been able to pivot and offer two learning experiences, whether it be in person or hybrid or remote, and continue to engage. So fun is always at the forefront of all that we do. And of course, providing racial equity opportunities for staff, youth, clients in all programs is always the forefront to making sure that's an asset to what we do and what we've always done for the past 26 years. And so if you're looking for fun opportunities to engage young people that's affordable and safe and educational, feel free to look at our website, urgenings.org. We are now enrolling for our summer camp for K to 5 for both boys and girls. And then for our middle school, we do have just for girls, our Rites of Passage Media Arts Camp for fun, film, activities, art, film, and of course, social emotional development is incorporated into all that we do. And for those high school students, we are providing industry professional mentorship in the industries of film. So we're activating young filmmakers and activating young entrepreneurs. So if we're looking to start our own business, right now is the perfect time to take advantage of learning how to be your own boss and start your own business. And so we provide those essential skills and platforms for them to showcase their amazing work with the young people, to recognize and validate and support the work that they do. So we continue to elevate their voice and wellness at the forefront. And of course, providing wellness for our staff as well.
These are great suggestions and conversations. And Shadia, both you and Emma have taken us in the direction that we want to go in next. And that's, what are some of the potential solutions to this childcare crisis? That was one of the real emphases of our childcare series. We did put a link to the series into the comments in case somebody wants to refer back to that. But let's talk more about what some of the potential solutions are that are working elsewhere or that we ought to be trying here. And Dr. Ilcheva, I'm going to go first to you.
Thank you, Jane. I'll talk a little bit broadly because I think we all align here when we talk about this topic that it's not just a local topic, and therefore the solutions that we seek can be implemented or maybe should be considered as part of a broader national approach. We did mention the need for that sector to be elevated, both in terms of wages, but also in terms of the quality of services they provide. And some of the panelists already talked about professional development and career growth that need to be considered for the workforce in that sector. They need to have viable career paths, and we need to assign the real value to their work. The value of their work is not the under $12 an hour that they're paying, but it's much bigger than that. We already talked about the long-term consequences of not providing affordable childcare. It's well documented the impacts of quality early childhood development has on long-term growth, personal and career growth for those who participate in these programs. But I think we need to talk about it as a national solution. It is a national crisis, childcare, and I'm glad it's being discussed at the national level. We do need to have universal childcare. We need to have free universal childcare, I would say, because we need to understand that childcare is not just something that concerns the families who have children, but it should concern all of us. And I also want to mention that I like the fact that we're talking about it in the context of infrastructure, because childcare and education is part of our human capital development. That is our basic infrastructure, our population infrastructure, our economic infrastructure are based on human capital development, from zero through the whole lifespan of an individual. More childcare, more affordable childcare, and better quality childcare at the national level, I think is the solution we need to be talking about.
Mario, you of course referenced the money that's coming from the latest legislation, and Gloria has asked a question on Facebook that I think is really at the crux of this, which is we don't want to just put things back together the way they were, because that system, as everybody's pointed out this morning, hasn't really worked very well. Are there specific concrete examples from other communities that you've seen or that other people have seen that are models that we should be considering here?
Sure, I appreciate the question, and I feel like that is the $39 billion question is how do you use this money wisely? And so I'll focus on three things. So I think one of the things that's come up a lot during the course of this conversation is affordability and the barrier that affordability presents for families when they're trying to get care. And so there are certain policies that states have introduced during the course of the pandemic with relief dollars, prior relief dollars, that have been of benefit to families. So the state of Illinois capped the out-of-pocket co-payments that parents who are eligible for childcare would provide to about $1.85 a month, so that it's de minimis, so that affordability doesn't present a barrier to accessing care for those who need it most. In the state of Alaska, they waived co-payments altogether for families who were eligible for childcare assistance, who are low-income working families who need the most help. States should be thinking about that and how they structure their affordability policies to make sure that more families benefit from the assistance that's being provided by the federal government. In terms of access, and this is something that Gladys and Maria mentioned before, we should really be building the supply of quality care in areas that do not have it. And so that's really going to take states and localities to take a hard look at where care exists and whether it meets certain indicators or measures of quality, because it's entirely possible that even if you have supply, as Gladys was mentioning before, it may not be meeting certain measures of quality. It may not be promoting the healthy growth and development of children. And so that's critically important. And I know that places like the state of Oregon have been thinking a lot about that, particularly in the context of infant and toddler care. What does that look like, especially in terms of relying on home-based care settings, for example, and maybe less on center-based care settings? because we know that a lot of parents have preferences towards home-based settings, particularly for young kids. And then with respect to the workforce, I feel like people have mentioned this a lot during the course of the conversation, and there's a reason, because the amount of money that we provide to early educators is wildly disproportionate to the value that they provide to families and to communities and to this country. And so they should be paid for that work. And they should be not living at poverty level wages and having to rely on government assistance themselves in order to provide the care that they're providing. And there are states that have been doing that in the context of relief dollars. So the state of California recently announced that they're going to be providing what is essentially hazard pay for home-based care workers who have been really doing heroic work during the course of the pandemic, and also providing them 16 days of paid sick leave, which is something that far too many providers do not have. And other states are thinking about how they can invest in the workforce as well. Make sure that they have, as Maria was mentioning, access to higher education and training and degree attainment, and then also coupling that with increased career opportunities and increased compensation. And so those are a few areas that I think folks should be looking at in the context of this relief funding.
Gladys, you are boots on the ground in this this picture here in Miami-Dade County. In your wish list, what kinds of programs would you like to see that would really make an appreciable difference in a direct kind of way?
I think the most important thing is that we need to have programs that are including infants and toddlers. You know, this is an age group that is at times forgotten, and we're not making it part of the conversation. So I think that we need to expand the services that we are providing infants and toddlers. And I think that another area that we need to think about when we're creating these plans that Mario has been talking about and others is that we really need to look at the reality of the community. And sometimes, you know, what we plan does not match the reality of the community. 75% or more of the care that is provided in Miami-Dade County is provided by private providers. And what does that mean? What does it mean? This is an industry already where the levels of gain as a business is very low. So what are we doing to make sure that that the providers are taking a look at that when we talk about opportunities for practitioners to increase their knowledge, that we're talking about compensating them for the time that they have to invest in getting more knowledge about the children that they're caring for. And sometimes we just don't do that. I'm thinking that that one of the things that we have not talked about, because it's you know, it would take us another day, is what's going to be the impact of the increase of the minimum wage on our families. And we have seen this over and over again. A family is making a certain amount of money, all of a sudden they're making $1,000 more a year, and they're not eligible to receive any kind of subsidy for the care of their children. So as we're moving forward and as we're getting plans, you know, are we planning at the same time for those families who are going to increase a little bit their salaries because of the increase in the minimum wage, and they are going then to lose the opportunities that they have for subsidy in childcare? So I don't think that we're going to help them, but we're just not going to help them more. And again, I think that that one of the things that it's more than important, and everybody has talked about, is, you know, let's take a look at the reality of the caregiver. It's a population that, even though there's many opportunities for them to attain more education, there's a lot of other areas that are impacting their lives. And like Mario was saying, you know, they're low income. They're part of the low income group in our community. You know, through the work that we have been doing at United Way, through financial stability, through the early care and education work that we do, we see this more and more and more. And we would like for these things to be addressed.
Thank you for bringing up those important questions around the benefits cliff. That is a topic for another day. We can't, unfortunately, effectively address that here. We've only got a couple of minutes left. And so if you have a question that you want to ask, you're in the audience, please drop that immediately into the comments. And meanwhile, Yadira, could you talk just briefly about some of the solutions that you found when you were doing your reporting? Solutions from elsewhere, lessons from elsewhere.
Sure. So what I found, people had the most success when they got out of silos, when they built networks. Like one of the solutions I came across was in Virginia. They created this network of private providers that could share resources, could share like an HR person or someone to help them with tech. It was one person to help all these private providers. And that helped each of the providers save some money because they didn't each have to pay someone to do that. They were just instead paying into this one system that helped all of them at once. Also, like employers who realize, this affects us. What affects our employees affects us. So employers who built actual on-site childcare centers, that's pretty rare, but that was another solution that I came across. I think overall, the solutions that I came across all had that in common. They realized that this is not just your kid, your problem. This is all interconnected. So those solutions, the ones that built those connections among people, among parents and workplaces and centers, that seemed to be the most successful.
I think that was a really great takeaway from your reporting for me. And there were also solutions like Emma is implementing, private entrepreneurs who were looking to create a link between consumers of one sort and the needs on the other end from businesses that might be able to help them. You want to talk a little bit more about that just for a second?
Sure. Yeah. There was a portal that was created to link parents with providers. That was another example. But I wonder if Emma could, because I know she has a bit of international experience, and I'm curious to know if you could chime in with what you saw when you worked abroad. Like, what were the policies that you noticed there that helped?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. And before I even mention that, I'll say that before I started working on this business that we're doing, which is the job site for early childhood education providers, we explored different business opportunities that we felt we could help make some sort of impact while also being, of course, a for-profit business. And the first one that we really explored was building an online marketplace where we could encourage employers to provide employee childcare benefits as an employee benefit to their employees. And I just said that like in a really confusing way, but basically where employers would offer as a benefit in addition to their health insurance and all different benefits that they offer to their employees, childcare as one of those benefits. And that could be childcare in a range of being a small cash subsidy every month that their employees could put towards the childcare option of their liking, or it could be building centers on site, like Yadira mentioned, which I know a lot of companies will use. Bright Horizons or one of these other big companies to do that. And we found that it was so challenging to convince employers to do that for their employees, and also a lot of COVID red tape that we decided not to pursue that. But there is definitely something there in terms of convincing these companies to help out. And in terms of my experience abroad, I spent most of my 20s living in Southeast Asia between Bangkok and Singapore, also working as a tech entrepreneur. And it was really interesting because in many of those places, it's so common to have someone live in with you coming from another country and have sort of a live-in nanny or a housekeeper, at least amongst my friends and my coworkers who were out there. But besides for that, most employers were sponsoring so many more benefits. So maternity leave was standard at least 6 months. And a lot of my friends who live in Europe have a 1-year maternity leave that is sponsored by their employers. Whereas here it's just 6 weeks. And some companies are more generous with that and they'll do 12 weeks or so. But yeah, it's really interesting.
Thank you so much. I think that was a great thing to remind us all. I'm always jealous of the long vacation policies that people have elsewhere, childcare policies, parental leave. So I want to thank all of our panelists today for being with us and helping us discuss this important topic. I want to especially thank Yadira for her hard work. It was a lot harder than it looked, and the results I think are really strong. We are putting Yadira's email address into the comments so that anyone who wants to continue to share information around this that she might want to pursue in future reporting, if you could let her know, that would be great. And I'm told that it's in the Facebook comments. And for all of you, we want to thank you from the Miami Herald for being with us today, both as audience and as panelists. And please stay in touch and let us know the concerns that you have in your lives here in Miami-Dade, and we will do our best to pursue reporting on them. Thank you so much, and take care, and everybody have a great day.